All right, what's up, guys? VV back with another video. And in today's video, guys, we're going to be talking about life gain and triggers. This is going to be a little more of a theory craft style video, just to let you guys know what you're getting into. I always like to warn y'all up front of what we're going to be covering in the video. And today we're going to be talking about a lot about yellow, but I am going to try to keep this as general as possible, as just like, is life gain good for the game? Are triggers good for the game? Things like that. You know, and trying to approach it from a totally logical and unbiased standpoint. Now, just to be 100% transparent with y'all up front, yellow is one of my favorite colors in the game, and so is black. Those are my two favorite colors. But I'm going to try and approach this from like a biased standpoint, again, like I was already saying. So let's go ahead and dive straight into it, guys. Let's start off by just laying out what I think are just basic game design principles on life gain. Typically speaking, in whatever game you're playing, gaining life is completely okay and healthy. To an extent, right? Like, that doesn't mean like, oh yeah, 100% leech or something is okay in a game where you can just gain life infinitely where it's just broken. We don't want that. You know, we want there to be some parameters on it. But in general, gaining life is okay and healthy. So fair triggers are also okay and healthy in my opinion. What do I mean by fair triggers? We're going to go into what I think are fair versus broken triggers in the next slide. But just know, I think there are fair triggers that are actually very healthy for the game, and they add another layer of complexity to the game that helps take it to the next level and allow you to do outplays of your opponent, right? Like, for example, playing around Jet Pistol, right? Or swinging with your lowest cost characters first to play around low cost KO from trigger effects. That is like, I feel like that's actually very important to have. Okay, so broken triggers though, that's where it's not okay. That's where you're hitting the unhealthy area. And as usual, guys, I'm using like green being good, yellow being in the middle, red being really bad, right? That's the the gauge we're using here. That's the little metric we're using, just colors. Broken triggers and too many triggers, it's just not good. It's not good for any game, or you know, this concept of having too many broken things in a deck or in whatever the game is you're playing. It's not good. It's unhealthy, right? And we're specifically talking about One Piece today. So gaining life in a deck with too many broken triggers, that's where we get to the point where it's like, okay, this is a very bad thing, right? This is unhealthy for the game, and it actually gives a sense of like, I can no longer play around this. Like, maybe some games you can, by the way. It'll always depend on the board state, but you guys know what I'm saying, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm going to attack my opponent, and I've got a full board, so I have to play around. And let's say I only have 1 or 2 life left. I'm having to play around him getting bodies. I'm going to have to play around him having a Thunderbolt. If I'm trying to go for lethal, I have to play around him having Beige or a 200 million volts of Mario that can gain life. Things like this where it's like, okay, there's just a little bit too many triggers that are on the verge or on the cusp of broken. And I'm not saying any individual one is broken, but I hope y'all see what I'm trying to say with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's keep getting into it here. Now we're going to talk about broken triggers versus fair triggers. And again, this is my opinion, and y'all tell me what y'all think in the comment section below. So what are quote-unquote broken triggers? Number one, there are characters in this game, events, and stages. That is all you can have in your deck. Your leader is outside of your deck. Your Dawn is outside of your deck. That's all 5 card types. So the other 3 card types are characters, which is the majority of most decks, then events, and then stages. Real quick, let's get the stages out of the way. I think every stage should be able to play itself from life, and if that would be too broken, then they need to adjust the stage where it's not broken, because I think having stages play from life is actually a very good thing, because it punishes early aggression to some extent, but not too much, where it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to be able to catch, it's like a catch-up mechanic. So I think stages playing from life is actually very important, but I can talk about that more in another video if necessary. All right, so events. Events with triggers that do not affect the board state, I think those are very healthy. What do I mean by that? So what I'm saying is this right here on the screen. Events with triggers that do not directly affect your opponent's characters. That's what I mean by board state, by the way, your opponent's characters. Desert Spada. And one thing I want to mention, guys, I'm not talking about the actual effect on these events. That doesn't matter. I'm talking about the trigger. Draw 2 and trash 1? Absolutely. I think that's a great trigger to have on a card. Not all cards, but like one of those triggers that I think is actually healthy for the game. Soap Sheep. Your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. Okay, cool. Now that's like a more aggressive, right? The Desert Spada is a little more passive. Soap Sheep's trigger is a little more aggressive. It allows you to put some, you know, some style on whatever deck you're playing, whatever colors you choose. And then we have Don Quixote Family here. This allows you to do a top 5 search. Okay, that's very cool in my opinion, and I think that is balanced to some extent, because you're not establishing a body, right? That's the main thing that I'm getting at there. And I think those events triggers are very healthy for the game. Now, events with triggers that do affect the board state are okay, but notice it's in yellow. That means I think it should be monitored. Like, I think, like, okay, let's have some of those, but not too many of those. For example, this on the screen here, Thunderbolt. Okay, that's a very powerful effect. We don't want too many of those in the game. But for those who play the game currently, you know that another card was just printed that does this on a character body in Onami. We'll look at that a little bit later. So it's like, okay, if there was just one of these in the game, of, you know, just Thunderbolt, not one copy, but like 4 copies, one version of this card in your deck that can KO a 5 or less, okay, that's probably fine, all things considered. Some people might think that's a little too strong, and I understand that, but I think y'all understand where I'm coming from. There needs to be some type of way for, you know, well, at least I think there should be some way for these events to have triggers that can affect the board in some way. Not in a broken way, but at least in some way. Like Shockwave. Shockwave and Punk Gibson in particular, guys, if these are in your hand and your opponent has no 3-cost or 4-cost characters on the board, well, you don't get any additional effect. You just get a 2-cost 4K. It's better than nothing, but people are running these cards for their additional effects, right? Otherwise, they'd run like 2K counters or something like that. You guys know what I'm trying to say. And I'm not saying these replace 2K counters. This is totally different. A 2-cost 4K event is very different, but y'all know what I'm saying. You would typically want to run this event so that you have this trigger potential in your life and the 4K event, right? It kind of doubles over where you get this this additional strength from it. And I think these effects are actually very strong and very solid and can still be very balanced in the game. So that's the yellow one here. Yes, they affect the board state, but it's in a way that, number one, can be typically played around, but at the same time, you don't want too many of them in the game, or it starts to become imbalanced or feeling unhealthy. So next up, this one should say unhealthy. I have it. I wasn't thinking. But characters with triggers that do not advance your board. Oh, that's why I have this. Okay. So that's where we get into the cards a lot of people complain about. The card I was just talking about, Onami, and Beige. These cards don't technically advance your board state. They do not develop a body, but they do directly affect your opponent, right, in one way or another. Shirahoshi is the more passive example where you do draw 3 and trash 2, but it does establish a 0-power body, which is better than nothing. But anyway, Onami and Gang Beige here, they actually directly affect your opponent's board state, or they can potentially. There might not be a target for Onami, there might not be a target for Gang Beige if it was their last attack. But the idea is, it's a very powerful effect, okay? And I think they should be very careful when printing effects this powerful, okay? That's where I'm really going with this. And then last but not least, characters with triggers that establish a 5K power character or more, like 5,000 power or more. I think that is, like, after playing the game and seeing the direction that the game is going, I think that's starting to become somewhat of a bad thing. So getting into this area. And I'm not saying that none should exist. I'm just saying that they should have been very limiting with cards like this. But for those who know, there are several cards like there are many cards like this. You know, I'm showing Perospero, Sanji, and Kikanojo on the screen. There are Neko Mamushi. There's what else? I'm not going to name them all off, guys, but there are very many of them. Just if you don't trust me, look it up. Just go to the Bandai card list and just do a trigger search, and you will find many of them. Cracker, Smoothie, they're all starting to come back to me a little bit. Y'all get the point. There are so many at this point, you could fill your deck up with, like, half your deck up with very solid 4-cost 5K trigger bodies that are coming into play from your life. And the main issue is this. Can you imagine if I made a card, like I'm asking you guys, the viewers, imagine if I made a card that was a 3-cost 5,000 power card that had on KO, look at the top 3 cards of your deck and reveal a Big Mom Pirates type card, and then put the rest on the back, put the rest on the bottom of the deck in any order. And then at the bottom it says, trash a card from your hand, unrest the 3 Dawn you played him with, and this character gets Rush. That is essentially what is happening with these characters when you play them from life. You're not paying the 4 Dawn for these guys, or 3 in the case of Perospero. You're not paying their Dawn cost. They have Rush because they're coming into play, on the opponent's turn. And then they're going to be able to attack. Unless they get KO'd. Again, that's the way you can play around these potentially, is attack first with your guys, KO whatever it lands, if it's possible, if you have those answers in your deck. But anyway, I think you guys see where I'm going with that, right? Like in the case of Kikanojo, if your opponent has 3 life or less, and they attack into you, You get a 4-cost, 6,000 power rush card that costs 0, though, for the turn, right? Because you don't have to actually pay the cost for it. And then if they KO it, you're getting life. It has an additional effect on top of that. And I don't know how to balance this in the future. One comment that I made, one suggestion that I made was maybe they need to have these characters interplay rested. Or another clause would be, all right, at the trigger down here. Imagine if it said, you may trash one card from your hand, play this card, it cannot attack until the end of your next turn. So in other words, your turn happens, they cannot attack that turn, and then the next turn they can attack. That'd be kind of hard to keep track of, but just something to help balance this, because I do think it's slightly it's a little too strong, especially the completely free effects that are based on restrictions. Like trashing a card from hand is at least something, right? That's at least one way of paying for this kind of effect, but it still feels a little strong. But again, y'all tell me what y'all think in the comment section below. And don't think that I'm complaining, guys. I play black and yellow. That's like my 2 main colors. So I'm playing all these cards. I'm not like complaining about them. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to approach this from a totally unbiased, logical standpoint. Okay, we got a few more things to talk about. How many triggers is too many? This is all just my opinion, and I want to know what y'all think in the comment section below. But there are 50 cards in a deck. If you have 10 triggers in your deck, I think that's probably a good number, by the way. I'll talk a little bit about how many triggers I think should even be legal in a deck. I think there should be limitations on this game going forward, by the way. I'll probably have to do an entire video about this in the future. I don't think a deck should be able to have more than 15 events. I don't think a deck should be able to have more than 15 triggers. Again, that's just me personally. And if you disagree, that's completely fine. I respect your opinion, but that's just the way that I feel personally. Okay, so let's go into this. 10 triggers. So if you have 10 triggers in a 50-card deck, 20%, 1 out of 5 of the cards in your deck will be a trigger. Okay, that's the theory. That's the logic behind it. And honestly, I think that's okay, right? Like, that's fine. That means, theoretically, just going off theoretical science here, you will have 1 trigger in your life. So, okay, that's not too game-breaking, right? Imagine instead, something I saw literally last night. I was up at a locals, and my buddy Joey over at Heart Pirates TCG, big shout out to him. He played against a guy. The guy went Parasparrow from life, by the way. The player did not play it out. He got a Parasparrow on his first life trigger, into a Sanji on his second life trigger, into a Kikinojo on his third life trigger. I mean, Joey was playing against somebody with basically, like, that player's deck got a handicap that game of plus 11 Dawn. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, plus 11 Dawn that he did not have to pay for. But, I understand people are going to say, well, he had to trash cards from hand other than with the Kikinojo. He had to trash cards from hand for the Parasparrow and the Sanji. But, I'm just saying, it's pretty interesting, guys. It's hard to manage that, no matter what deck you're playing. It's hard to manage when people are just getting free, value like that. Okay, and one more thing I want to say before we go on is I understand a lot of decks are starting to get that free value. We're starting to see green be able to flood the board, purple, black with Gecko Moria. We're starting to see that, and maybe that's Bandai's way of balancing it. That's for a whole nother video. All right, let's keep going. So 10 triggers plus life setters or life gain, I think that's also okay. This is what I mean by life setters. Hiyori allows you to set at the top, take the top card of your life and then set a card there. Heavenly Fire does the exact same thing for their trigger. And then Katakuri does this as a leader effect. It allows you to not quite set life, but move it around. And I still consider that kind of a setter. Okay. So 10 triggers plus a life setter or life gain, I think that's still okay. But when you start getting into the 20 trigger range, 40% of your deck is triggers. So if you have 5 cards in your life, let's say you're a monocolor leader with 5 life, or even you gained a life over the course, gained a life over the course of the game, well, probably 2 of those cards are going to be triggers. Okay, then you get into 25 triggers. Well, now probably half of them are going to be triggers, and it starts feeling a little bit overwhelming. It starts the amount of value. But again, I'm not saying it's completely broken or anything. I'm trying to be very careful with the way I word these things. But it is starting to feel a little bit overwhelming from that standpoint of just, okay, attacking into yellow is starting to feel just absolutely horrible. And then, okay, if you don't want to attack into yellow and they're playing Katakuri, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just drop a 7 Lin and then a 10 Lin, and I'll just beat you no matter what. And I'm just going up in life and going up to 5, 6, 7 life, like, oh, well, just it gets a little bit hard to deal with. So 25 plus triggers with setters and life gain. I do think that's approaching a territory that's bad for the game and unhealthy. Like I said, I think 15 triggers should be about as high as you could go in a deck. But once you get to 20, 25 triggers and up, and for those who don't know, this is not uncommon. Most yellow decks nowadays, especially in OP06 and going forward, have about 25 to 30 triggers, guys. Like, actually 25 to 30 triggers. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. So, if they have 30 triggers, 3 out of their 5 life cards are going to be triggers without even setting them. So, if you have setters in your deck as well, again, that's cards that I'm talking about where you can adjust it. It's just 100% trigger rate almost at that point, right? It becomes like a 75% plus trigger rate at that point. So, yeah. And going forward, now looking at the future of the game, this is how I think, so spoiler warning, if you don't want to see any OP07 stuff, just, go ahead and close out. My apologies. But this is a leader coming out in OP07. Now, this is a yellow leader done correctly, where most of their cards, I'm not going to spoil all their cards, go look it up if you want to see what it does, but all of the cards are catered to this one specific leader, with a few exceptions, okay? And that makes a little more sense, right? As opposed to a card like this, these 3 cards on the screen here, you can just put this in any deck that runs yellow, and you're basically benefiting, right? You're basically, getting a net positive gain here if you get any of these cards from your life, especially Kikanojo. Now, I don't want to end this by saying, like, oh yeah, the game's just broken and, like, they need a nerf yellow. I'm not saying they should. If anyone says that in the comment section below, you clearly misunderstood me and you didn't listen to the end of the video, what I'm saying now. Because what I'm trying to say is, I think they just need to be careful and approach things from more of this standpoint, as opposed to just printing out cards that are so universally powerful. By the way, I'm also, looking at Gecko Moria. That's just not the topic of today's video, by the way. Today we're talking about life and triggers. But cards like Gecko Moria, it's like, okay, they're starting to push the power level a little too much. And I wish they would, really consider ideas like this. Like, maybe they do, by the way. I don't know if they do. I don't work at Bandai. I don't talk to anyone at Bandai. I have no idea what their mindset is. But when you start getting into this orange and red area, I do think they've been overlooking a few things and being a little too free will on what they're putting into the game. And I'm very curious to see what y'all say in the comment section below. But yeah, that's about it, guys. I still like One Piece. I like playing it. I don't think it's, like, horrible or anything like that. But at this rate, if they continue to go on by printing, the power creep is getting to a point where it is getting a little silly. That's all I'm trying to say. So yeah, that's all. I should just end it there before I say something stupid. Now I regret. All right, guys. I hope y'all enjoy. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not already. And until next time, guys. Peace.